Hello there, my name's Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares. And every year since I've started making pixel art, I've had this annual tradition of creating a new Jedi Luke Skywalker sprite. In the earlier years, it was a really nice way to look back and recognize my own progress with this medium. But more recently, as I've become more comfortable with things, I worry less about outdoing myself every year, and just kind of have fun exploring whatever variations and styles I'm into at the moment. For this year's Skywalker sprite, I'm really going to be utilizing that fun and stylistic end of the spectrum because I want to make something that's got quite a low fidelity look to it. Earlier this year, I did a mock-up of Obi-Wan Kenobi in a style inspired by Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. And I had a lot of fun assembling all the little components required for that. So I've been thinking of taking that idea of the top-down RPG, but aiming for something more inspired by the form factor of the Game Boy Color Pokemon games. Ultimately, what I'd like to do is to create a few mock-ups based on moments from Return of the Jedi in this kind of style. I've been quite busy lately with other obligations and just kind of finding less time available than normal for personal and video projects and stuff. So I'm taking this opportunity now to explore the character sprite work, and then hopefully I'll get to follow up with these mock-ups at some point, even if that ends up being like my New Year's resolution or something. But for now, I'm sneaking in this character exploration under the wire, just before the end of the year, and I'm just going to work my way through a few different appearances to experiment with the sprite style itself. Along the way, I'm also tackling a couple preliminary animations. Like right here, I'm doing a simple walk cycle for the downward-facing sprite by having one hand brought to the back, the other hand brought sort of in front of the body, and then changing the black line work of the feet to make it look like one is coming forward and the other is going back. Another important thing with the walk cycle is to have the head bob up and down. So I'm going to move the head down by 1 pixel in this step pose as well. And then from here, I can take this sprite and mirror it to create the opposite step pose. And then when we alternate those in sequence with the standing pose, we get this really simple but effective walk cycle. You might notice as well, I've also refined the sprite a little bit here just by sorting out the line work for the hair. Kind of have it like parted to one side like that. On the technical side of things, one of the considerations with these Game Boy style sprites is that they're only capable of up to 4 colors per sprite. And in this case, I mean sprite in the sense of like a singular 8x8 or 8x16 tile. So it's 4 colors per sprite, but one of those 4 color assignments is generally taken up by a transparency, like that counts as one of the colors. So that really only leaves us with 3 colors to work with for the design itself. In this case, I've gone with black line work, a beigey skin tone shade, and then this sort of darker blue for the outfit. And that one's also doubling as the hair color, which is sort of a necessity, but it's also kind of acceptable and cohesive within this fidelity. I'm imagining that the lightsaber would be its own individual sprite that becomes overlapped with that of the character. And that's why we see this little white hilt applied over the sprite like that. Now, I also wanted to make Luke's Endor outfit. So in keeping with the scheme of only 3 colors and a transparency, I've substituted the dark blue for a green color in the costuming. And then the nice thing was that the beige skin tone also doubles as a highlight shade for that green. So we're actually able to squeeze out an appropriate amount of rendering out of just these 3 colors. And that's still with keeping 2 of them the same as the original sprite. And again, in exploring the ignited saber, I'm picturing that as its own sprite that's superimposed with the character. So individually, the lightsaber is composed of black, green, and this sort of pinkish white, and is, seemingly expanding the character color palette, but in reality would be its own isolated sprite with transparency and all of that. Now that there's a good collection of sprite work going, I'm going to finish off with a couple more animations. I thought it'd be fun to see him bring the hood of the cloak down and reveal his face. So for this, I'm just getting started by creating this array of sprites that I can use to kind of bash out a rough sequence. One of the things that's great with this low fidelity of sprite is that I find it fairly straightforward and pretty forgiving in predicting what the animated movements should be. So I've taken to just kind of eyeballing the sequence before testing out the animation, and then obviously eventually collecting the frames together to see what it is I've actually made. In this case, it's pretty close to what I was hoping, but the outline around the hood doesn't really move a lot on its way down. And one of the things that's going to help us feel that movement and that volume of the hood is if we do see the outline, and therefore the silhouette of the character actually kind of shifting while this piece is supposed to be in motion. So I've made a few edits just to make sure that the hood outline has some more movement to it, and that's helping give the fabric a bit more weight and a bit more movement. In the finalized version of this, I've given one of the frames a head bob that moves the head down by 1 pixel, and that's just providing a bit more bounciness to everything. The other touch is that he closes his eyes and kind of looks up after taking the hood off, which is just ever so subtly indicated by the hairline and the ears changing position along there. As I said, these types of low-resolution sprites can be pretty forgiving and easy to work with in terms of being able to quickly appreciate all these little subtle changes to the feel of an animation. One of the things that I've always loved about pixel art is just that puzzle aspect of things. You know, by changing a single pixel here or there, you're able to affect the overall recognizability or the feel of an image. And that's really the most true and most evident when creating low-resolution work. Because proportionally, each individual pixel counts for so much more than if you were working at higher res. So for that reason, low resolution has always been this kind of scaling that I highly recommend to beginners. And you know, I always thought, like, as I got more experience and improved at pixel art, it would just naturally translate to me doing larger and more detailed pieces. But in reality, the way this has been shaking out is that I actually just find myself kind of becoming more fascinated with the utility and kind of these clever applications when you're under severe restrictions like this. I wouldn't doubt at some point I'm just going to lose my mind down that rabbit hole and probably be making scenes that use individual single pixels for characters and stuff like that. Like, nah, you guys just don't get it. But anyway, we're actually getting close to the end here, so let's move along and take a look at the finalized sprite exploration for this year's Game Boy Color Jedi Luke Skywalker sprite. Here we go. Alright, so at the last minute I decided to squeeze out a few more sprites, like the R2-D2 and then the X-Wing flight suit appearance, since there is a brief moment where we do see that in Return of the Jedi. So let's put the Sears up on the board with the rest. As I mentioned, it's been nice in recent years to see more of the fun and style explorations coming out, rather than this pressure to constantly outdo. Even so, I'd highly recommend some exercise like this to anyone that is sticking with a hobby. I've always found it to be a healthy exercise to revisit or remake your own work, to feel improvements or challenge yourself to new interpretations. So I hope you enjoyed the journey for this year's sprite. I'll hopefully get around to those full mock-ups at some point. And thank you for watching, and take care and keep it square.